Are the Troubles coming back to the north of Ireland? Some British military veterans have stated that they oppose a hard border with the south because, quite simply, this risks causing a return to the dark days of the Troubles, which killed thousands and affected many more. Soldiers used to guard the British side of the 500-kilometre long border with the south of Ireland during the Northern Irish Troubles, a period of conflict that began in 1968 and stretched for over 30 years. Since the late 1960s, many border roads were barricaded by British troops, cross-border rail lines were shut, and some roads were also heavily fortified with border checkpoints to prevent smuggling of goods and terror across the border. Britain's withdrawal from the EU threatens to make that border more significant and more visible. Individuals linked to the self-styled new IRA told the Sunday Times newspaper they hoped the border would be hard as hell and confirmed suspicions they see Brexit as an opportunity. There is clearly a threat to public safety. A sentence of life imprisonment for Kevin Braney, the leader of the new IRA, may have reduced the momentum of this new terror group, but the new IRA still presents the biggest threat to the security of the state since the Provisional IRA ceasefire in 1994, according to Garda Security and Intelligence. And it is also top of the terror list in Northern Ireland, where last month it was responsible for the car bomb attack outside a courthouse in Derry. Does the so-called new IRA pose a genuine threat to peace in the province? And what impact could the problems of Brexit have on peace on the island of Ireland and beyond? Simple questions with important answers. Let's go back a step and start with this. How much awareness is there about the new IRA, and is it worrying people? We put that to the public here in London. This is what they said.
It worries me that they're terrorists in suits. I mean, that's what seems to be the thing at the minute. People who had a big impact during the Troubles are now recognised politicians, and I'm not sure it's the way forward. You know, open debate is great, but are they wolves in sheep's clothing? I don't know.
No, I haven't heard of them, and no, it doesn't frighten me in any way. No, I suppose because I feel I'm that much removed from it.
Any sort of violence worries me, but at the minute, thank goodness, it seems to be in a reasonably small scale. So at the minute, it doesn't really worry me, but you never know how these things can manifest themselves in the future.
Yes, I have heard about them, and yes, I mean, it concerns me for the generations that are living there and the younger people coming through, and the lives and how, so possibly in terms of a day-to-day, is obviously them there rather than us, so here in London.
Let's be honest, if there's a physical barrier, we should have expected this. What we need to do is, what the UK and the government needs to do is plan ahead to make sure that this problem doesn't continue, doesn't expand, and that the Good Friday Agreement is still kept. That's the most important thing, yes.
It is very concerning that, and I hate to blame Brexit for everything, but I think that's certainly contributing to this apparently new organisation that seems to be appearing in Northern Ireland.
I don't think I've got a view on that at the moment because it's still at a very early stage. But obviously I was in London when we had the attacks, happening here 30 odd years ago. So I was fully aware of what's happening then. And we want to see that happening again in the UK or anywhere else come to that, or in Ireland.
I don't know, it just depends on how it would affect kind of the community, and I guess I'd only read about it or see it on TV or in newspapers or whatever.
Yes, it does worry me because it means a return to sectarian violence and potentially the Troubles all over again, especially at a time when we've got polarisation with Brexit and the potential fallout of a no deal, which will inevitably lead to all sorts of problems.
It seems to me, from what I know about it, that it isn't a particularly significant development at the moment. It seems to be a very small group of people. They're people who reject the Good Friday Agreement and who want to continue an IRA campaign. I don't think they represent much. However, if you look at the history in Ireland, of course, in the past, the IRA has been very, very marginal and has at various times gained support because of the situation in Ireland, and of course that could happen again. I don't think it's particularly a cause for concern. My view is that there should be one Ireland, there should be a united Ireland. I've always considered that view. I think it's an artificial border which was imposed by the British nearly 100 years ago now. So I would like to see that. I hope that is achieved without having to resort to the kind of violence that we saw in the past.
Well, of course, the new IRA has emerged from the, if you like, the debris of the fallout that took place within the Republican movement following the Good Friday Peace Agreement. There was a rejectionist part of the Republican movement that then decided to continue with what they called their armed struggle. What's happened, unfortunately, for the Republican cause is that then that, to some degree, has fallen into disarray, that movement, in terms of its links with and its activities in what can broadly be called quite serious criminality. That's led to a lot of splits, a lot of infighting, but above all, those organisations became very heavily infiltrated, not just by other factions, but also by the security services of both Britain and Ireland themselves. And so it meant that they weren't able to become, even though they carried out some pretty horrific crimes against civilians, they nonetheless aren't anything in the same league as the Provisional IRA or the Irish National Liberation Army, for example, was in the past. But absolutely, as things currently stand, it is still the most serious threat to state security, both in the north and the south of Ireland.
Kevin Braney, the leader of the new IRA, has been sentenced to life imprisonment after being found guilty of a murder in 2013. Is this the end for the new IRA? We asked the public.
No, they almost become martyrs for the cause, and they probably gain a little bit more of a foothold because of that, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think they would find another leader, obviously, because as much as he might be at the helm, he's obviously got followers that are quite close to him that would obviously just take over the role, wouldn't they?
If you think about republicanism's been around for several hundred years, and as soon as one element of it closes out, it manifests itself in another way. So while someone's in prison, I've no doubt someone else will take over, and then it'll evolve and it'll constantly evolve.
No, I don't think at all. I think if there's a feeling towards that, then that would be continued and generated by people on the ground.
Just because you take out one leader, it won't change anything. They'll still have another person who could be more radical in terms of their approach. So, you know, on that front, you just need to make sure that you have someone that you can have discussions with, and it doesn't escalate into bombings like we've seen in previous situations with the IRA.
I think it's pretty fundamental, and it's been resurrected, I think, by all this talk about Northern Ireland backstop, and of course the DUP don't really help the situation either, so I think it's looking quite ugly, the future up there.
I don't think something like this can just go away. I really don't.
Life in prison sometimes doesn't mean that it's going to be the end of all of the troubles, of course, especially if there's, you know, a group of people below, people who are, you know, not well educated, or people who still have really strong beliefs, either left or right.
With powerful roles, someone will turn up to fill the power vacuum.
The point about the IRA, its fortunes were very, very much connected to the situation of the nationalist population in the north of Ireland, and therefore they grew as a result of the civil rights movement in the 1960s, because Catholics very often didn't have the right to vote, they didn't have the right to council housing on the same basis as Protestants, and all of those sorts of questions. So there were real reasons why it grew, and of course it grew as well because there was very, very heavy military presence in Northern Ireland. Now those things have gone, and therefore I guess that they haven't got the real basis for things for development of the IRA at the moment. So I think really his arrest and imprisonment, it's difficult to tell what impact it will have. Probably some impact, but it's you know, it's something that, regardless of whether he's imprisoned or not, I don't think we're talking about a significant force at the moment.
What has happened in the past with different organisations, and what will almost certainly happen with this so-called new IRA, is that leadership comes and goes. Leadership, when it's either killed or it's jailed, will be replaced by some other volunteer, and there are no shortage, I think, of volunteers. That doesn't mean to say the new IRA is a particularly large or a particularly popular organisation. It certainly has dedicated followers, both politically and militarily. But because I say that there is no shortage of people who will step in his shoes as the leader of this paramilitary organisation, doesn't mean to say they have any huge broad-based support, notwithstanding they do have some support. And so therefore, Braney's arrest and conviction and sentencing means that he's out of the picture for some time, but he will be replaced, and it may be that he's replaced with somebody perhaps more capable of turning the the new IRA into some kind of more potent force. It may also, of course, act as a warning to others to step into his shoes, bearing in mind what's happened to him.
Could a hard Brexit genuinely trigger a return to the days of the Troubles? Here's the public's view.
I certainly don't think it's helping. I mean, I'm all for open borders, regardless, including Europe. But the issue with the Irish border obviously has become a real bugbear as far as the whole Brexit thing goes. So who knows how it's going to work out, you know.
I do wonder about that. I don't know how it works at the moment, and is there a hard border there at the moment? Not being involved in it, I'm not that 100% aware.
It's a very good question. I don't know. I like to think not. I don't think there's an appetite in Northern Ireland for return to violence. But, you know, it's a question you mentioned before. A lot of people will take the opportunity and the instability. People will grab upon that and try and exploit it. So I don't think so. I don't think there will be a return to violence.
It will bring up the views again about the divisions. It will bring the people who have very strong polarised views back into play. It will not help again in terms of progression for that, in terms of Ireland and moving forward.
When you have a hard border, you need to make sure that something prevents the flow of people coming in. So how do you solve that problem? Physical barriers is one, CCTV is another. So CCTV as in tracking the lorries that come through. That could solve a part of the issue. The question is, can it appease everyone? And who's going to fund it? That's the main issue, yeah.
I think it's not just the hard border, it's the fact that, you know, we're just segregating off an organisation in a way, so that it makes it a bit sad, really, that we're all kind of starting to get these feelings of severe nationalism appearing.
Yeah, I do. I think it could do, because, I mean, again, what I've been reading and what my understanding is that with the hard border, this could be an issue.
I don't think so, but I also think that it potentially could, I guess, because you know, Northern Ireland is already kind of divided, I guess, between the Unionists and the Nationalists, that it could potentially cause more trouble. Again, I wouldn't really know what type of trouble it would cause, but I guess they already have some borders and some fences still up that they still have to close because of the issues that it still has.
Absolutely, it was inevitable, because you'll have the Unionists using it as an opportunity, and then the Loyalists would never wanted to split up. So it'll be it's a perfect storm.
I think the problem with a hard border is that it's something that obviously the vast majority of people, both north and south of the border, don't want. They want to be able to travel for a whole number of different reasons. It's a small country. Many people see it as one country, and it should be, as I say, I think it should be seen as one country. The danger with a hard border, of course, it leads to conflict, it leads to implementation of border controls, which can lead to violence. I don't think this is automatically the case, and I think there's rather a lot of talk about this, which doesn't necessarily mean very much. I think the main thing that will happen if there's a hard border is that it will just make life incomparably more difficult for the people who live on either side and who may work or have family on the other side of the border.
I think given that the peace process has now been in place for some years, and people on all sides of the community in Northern and Southern Ireland, the whole island of Ireland, can see the benefits that have accrued through that peace process economically, politically, socially and so on, that I think it's not going to threaten the peace process per se. However, it is likely to result in an increase in violence, particularly in the border area. And that's particularly so if, for example, what might be called the infrastructure of security is put in place, watchtowers, checkpoints and so on. And of course Brexit, if it's a no-deal Brexit, and if the EU or the UK demand, as a no Brexit seems to imply, that there are border checks, there will need to be that infrastructure. And then because of groups like the new IRA, those customs officials, immigration officials and so on will need to be guarded. They will be needed guarded by police and of course by troops because of the terror threat against them. Those troops will then be interacting with the local community, which will cause friction, and also, and that is likely to lead to negative interactions, which then could result in more terrorism.
According to the British Times newspaper, the new IRA is made up of at least 40 hardcore members who sought to revive conflict on the island. The group was formed in 2012, a merger of the real IRA, splinter groups and Republicans wanting to take a militant approach. The UK spy agency MI5 has an astonishing 20% of its workforce in Belfast as part of a huge intelligence operation. That's more than 700 officers, and that number could rise. Should the government even consider a no-deal Brexit if it does mean a hard border in Ireland? The public said this.
Personally, I don't think we should ever consider a no deal. I personally was a Remainer because I'm into multiculturalism and open borders. However, I can understand the reasons for why to try and take some of the bureaucracy back, and it's divided the country, and however it turns out, I don't think there's a positive solution at the minute.
Well, I suppose it wouldn't affect me personally, so in that respect it wouldn't bother me, but I feel it will possibly affect a lot of people, and that's who we've got to consider. But I do think a hard Brexit is possibly on the cards, the way things are going.
I don't think there will be a hard border. I don't think there's an appetite in either London or Dublin or for the local communities to be a hard border. I don't think there will be one.
I think it would be better to go back, that people know now what that might mean for them and where they live and their families and sort of specifically the countries, and therefore one should be able to vote again on what we know now as opposed to before.
Is, I think, key for the government to be honest with the public, to say this is how much it's going to cost the taxpayers' money. Where are you going to get that money from? Once we know that, then afterwards we'll know at what situation, for the banks, how comfortable they'll be investing in this country, and then hopefully from there we can try and work things out to make sure that things do not get as bad as people want it to be.
I think they're kind of very linked in a way. It's again this awful political situation where the DUP have such influence, if you like, at number 10, that they're making the whole negotiation so impossible, I think, and really difficult.
Definitely should consider because at the moment nobody knows what's happening in the future. We're all really quite concerned about the Brexit, and of course that's worrying for the nation as well as for everybody else. So it must be also a big concern for Ireland, for the Irish people, I would have thought.
Well, I guess hopefully, people would think of it a bit differently and they have more education, more information about what troubles it could cause. So hopefully through education that it wouldn't actually happen as much as what it did previously. I mean, I'm not really well versed in Northern Ireland English troubles, as you can probably tell. So, I don't know. It's a hard choice.
No, absolutely not. It's because we'll end up Scotland will go as well, and then Wales, and then Cornwall. So we'll be left with just England.
I'm against a Tory no deal. I think it's something that they really want to, the people who are most in favour of this want to have completely free trade, want to weaken workers' rights, and I think that would affect people in Ireland, both sides of the border. I have to say, I think a very easy solution to this would be a border poll, for which there is provision under the Northern Ireland, the Good Friday Agreement, and which, as I understand it, Sinn Féin are now calling for. In other words, that the people, both north and south, vote to decide whether they want the border to continue. I think actually if that happened, you would see the majority in Ireland as a whole would be calling for a united Ireland, and that seems to me would be a much more sensible solution. The people in the north voted in the majority to remain. The people in the south, as I understand it, don't seem to have any problem with being in or the majority with being in the European Union. And surely this would be a much better solution to the whole Brexit question.
Certainly from the perspective of the EU negotiating team, the peace, maintenance of peace in Ireland is of crucial importance, and you would have thought it would also be for the British government. Certainly it is for the Irish government. And given the obvious danger that a hard border can lead to an escalation of violence, which then could actually escalate well away from border areas and cause a new revival of what the armed groups called the armed struggle, terrorism to anybody else perhaps. Obviously there's a very high risk that this would happen. And so therefore one wonders, if not whether Brexit should go ahead, why, with just even days to go till Brexit, why these issues haven't been thought out and thought through in any more detail by especially those that have been proposing Brexit as the favoured choice. Bearing in mind that in most cases, those people who were arguing for Brexit, in effect were arguing for this very no-deal Brexit.
Would the public consider supporting a united Ireland if that prevented terrorism?
That's been an issue for centuries. I can't ever see that being resolved purely because of Brexit. In fact, if anything, it's probably worsening the situation.
Well, again, I don't think it affects us personally. It's the people that live in those places. And surely if there hasn't been a hard border at the moment, then how can that ever cause any problems? I don't see that it should.
No, because terrorism can't win. But interestingly, I would have classed myself as a unionist with a small u, but with the whole Brexit, that would force me to look at how I would vote in the future.
Ideally, yes, but that could still take time. But yes, but having a border back in is not going to help any semblance of a border.
It's one of the options that should be on the table, yes, but I think patriotism for this country and for Northern Ireland is going to outweigh that. So I don't think people will be very, very happy with this. No, I think there will be riots at some stage, potentially, because of this.
I think now the people in Northern Ireland are beginning to feel rather more Irish than British, DUP extremists apart. So yes, I think it would do that. And yeah, I think in the long term, that's where it has to finish.
In an ideal world, yeah, maybe a unified Ireland, but would that ever likely to happen? Do you think so?
I guess it depends on what the Irish people think, especially because the Republic of Ireland had, so much history to fight for their freedom anyway, that then I guess it would go backwards for them, and then the same as Northern Ireland.
At the end of the day, it's an island. We've taken a chunk of it, I think, historically, to stop them invading us. That was hundreds of years ago.
I think the whole basis of Irish terrorism has been to do with British control of Ireland, firstly in the whole island of Ireland up to 1922, and then the 6 counties of the north, which is still part of the United Kingdom. It simply there wouldn't be a basis for the IRA without that border. So I think a united Ireland would be something I think that would be welcome, should be welcomed by most people in Britain, and then hopefully we could have friendly but independent relations between the two countries, and should be welcomed by the majority of people in Ireland. And I don't think we should think that the DUP, who are propping up the Tory government, in any way speak even for Northern Irish people on this question, let alone people in Ireland as a whole.
A unified Ireland would certainly mean that there wouldn't be any problems on the border areas in respect of border controls and checks that, for example, a hard Brexit might bring along. But it's notable that there has long been an issue of security, of terrorism or armed struggle, depending on which side of the fence you sit, in Ireland. After all, a large proportion of the population of Northern Ireland is Protestant. You could expect in a united Ireland that some of those people, some armed groups within the Protestant community, the Unionist community as they're known, would become a terrorist threat to Ireland itself in that case. Also, there's the issue of whether it goes beyond really just about being a united Ireland. The idea that if a united Ireland came along, that all armed violence from Republican groups would end, I think is wrong, because many of them have other agendas, for example, in terms of socialism, against being anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist. And so there are a number of agendas that they can then use armed force to project. So I think it would be naive, certainly idealistic, to believe that if there was a united Ireland, it would somehow end the problem from one side or another of the divide, the problem of terrorism.
The conflict in Northern Ireland has caused huge and deadly strains. These are primarily between pro-British, mostly Protestant unionists, dedicated to retaining Northern Ireland's place in the United Kingdom, and Irish nationalists, mainly Catholics, who want to unite with the Republic of Ireland. Now the Brexit debate is stirring up old tensions in a very immediate way. The south of Ireland has sentenced Kevin Braney to life imprisonment. This could be seen as a major blow to the so-called new IRA. But the question remains, is a real threat of terror returning and the days of the Troubles coming back? Westminster politicians say no, but perhaps the reality is that they can only hope for no, because in truth, nobody knows for sure.